Who now has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country?
Georgian townhouses on the moon.
The highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way.
Small modular reactors under every village green.
This is Anglo-Futurism.
Hello and welcome to the Anglo-Futurism podcast. I'm Tom O.
And I'm Calum Drysdale. Britain is much reduced. The treasury is empty, the court is in disarray, all that remains of England is a collection of fortified villages in a swamp, and the enemies are all around. The year is not, as you might presume, 2025, but rather 877, and King Alfred, founder and patron of this podcast, is in trouble.
Here to tell us more is Alex Burghart, MP. Scholar of the Anglo-Saxon world, Alex has broken new ground in the study and tracing of Anglo-Saxon society before the Norman conquest.
In his spare time, he's also a Member of Parliament for Brentwood and Ongar and a keen advocate for AI in government. And for the first time, we have two guests today with us.
We also welcome Dr Laura Gilbert, a particle physicist who has helped Number 10 to bring AI into government, working alongside Alex.
But let's focus on the important stuff. Alex, what can modern Britain learn from King Alfred and the figures of that era?
It's a very important question, and one that isn't asked often enough. And I think the key thing to take away from not just Alfred's reign, but from the medieval period in general, is that out of chaos comes order. And that that the crisis is often the moment where the new world is forged. When the metal is hot, that's when it's malleable. And if we just sort of go back from Alfred to the period before Alfred, which is the end of the Roman Empire in Britain and the creation of the Anglo-Saxon age. And we're going to do this up on this space station by sort of peering into a sort of wormhole periscope. And that will enable us to sort of reach out to Vega, where we have an observatory. And Vega will be able to sort of pick up the light from about 400 AD. And what we'll see there through our periscope is a world in which most people on the island are living in cities. They're using the written language, they're using Latin. They're living in cities built of stone. They're Christian. They have currency which is used all over the Western world, in the north of Africa, in Persia, and it has every semblance of being a permanent entity. And then if we go a little bit, we go to the next observatory, which is in Arcturus, which is 100 light years closer. We can now see the same island in 500 AD. And almost nobody is living in cities. People are speaking German. There is no currency. Nobody is building in stone. And, everybody's taking cold showers. And that Roman world is completely transmogrified into something different. It's the most dramatic change in recorded history that happens on our island. And what is fascinating about this sort of meltdown is that ultimately it leads to the creation of the most stable medieval state anywhere in Europe. Indeed, a medieval state that is still with us. That what is formed in that period, triggered really by Alfred, is the English kingdom, the English crown, the English shires, the English language, the English currency, the English laws, and the English church. And And so actually what comes out of the collapse of the Roman Empire in Britain is something that's far more durable. The Roman Empire in Britain lasts 400 years, and England marches on. And Alfred's moment in that is, as you know, as he is your founding editor, is particularly significant because Alfred is born in the middle of the 9th century, and he soon after he's born, a large Viking army turns up. And the Vikings have been coming to Britain for quite a long time. They steal stuff, they leave, they make a nuisance of themselves. They ask for money in return for leaving. They take the money, they don't leave. They ask for more money, they clear off, they come back. But then, in 866, a Mikael Herre, a great army, turns up from Denmark with a different agenda. It kills the kings in Northumbria. It kills the kings in East Anglia. It sends the king of Mercia into exile. Sends him. Burghart goes to exile in Rome, and then it turns its sight on Wessex, which is Alfred's kingdom. And Alfred's brother, who's then on the throne, along with a young Alfred, fight them repeatedly, lose many battles to them, win some, and then as you've hinted at, in around about 878, there is a crisis moment for Wessex. The West Saxon army is defeated, and Alfred falls back into the fens and fastnesses of Somerset, completely alone, burns some cakes, and somehow manages to rally people round him and defeat the Viking army and come to terms with them. And a few years later, just before we suspect he found your podcast, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us that he occupies London and restores it and gives it to his son-in-law, Athelred of Mercia. And this is perhaps the very first act of Anglo-futurism. And that here we are, the moment when Alfred has taken London, we're told that all of the English who are not under Danish rule pay homage to him. He restores London. And what that means is you've got to imagine London, we'll look through a sort of slightly different sort of observatory, the periscope, and we'll see that London at this time looks a little bit different to the London that we know today. That Anglo-Saxon London, or Mid-Saxon London, was an area along the Strand, the beach. It was a big beach market that stretched roughly from where Nelson's Column is today, round to the Fleet, round to just this side of St Paul's Cathedral. But Roman London had been the square mile, and you could still see the wall around it at that time. St Paul's Cathedral was there, but nothing else was. It was sort of, presumably a hodgepodge of Roman ruins. And Alfred says, and we can see it in the archaeological record, Alfred moves the beach market, moves the trading settlement that is outside the walls into the walls, and creates a new city in the ruins of the old. And it's a much better place to fortify against the Vikings, but also it brings with it this kind of post-Roman grandeur that we are rebuilding the thing that was lost.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that that's the act of Anglo-futurism, because I think there are a number of other parallels, right? It's that the lines about, now you'll have to potentially correct my Anglo-Saxon pronunciation.
I'm sure it's perfect.
But the looking at the ruins of Bath and calling them the Ald Enter Jawerk, right? Mm-hmm. The work of giants. The idea that
very good. No need for any correction.
But what's astonishing about that, right, is as you say that you have this people who are living, as I think we think of ourselves, as living in the ruins of and the remnants of what was once a more advanced civilization
in a post-imperial world.
In a post-imperial world.
Where the ruins of an empire lie all around them.
Although I'm also amused that you would say that was also the Anglo-futurism, because I would say, our other topic and potentially how we can bring our other guest into the conversation, that the burghs are the equivalent of a sovereign AI. Similarly, by building this line of fortified market towns, the state was built and was able to resist foreign forces.
Well, they become sovereign data centers, you might say, the repository of the wealth and energy and capability of the nation. And so yes, what you find in the late 9th century is this critical reorganization of government in a way that proves remarkably durable, and that is when the medieval towns of England are essentially founded. Many of them founded on Roman sites, on older sites, on old Anglo-Saxon sites, but they are given an institutional coherence that they haven't had before, and that lasts right up to the modern period. And if we get, it just goes to say, if at a critical moment a nation can order things in the right way, the consequences can be incredibly enduring.
What really strikes me about this period is how precarious it was for the Anglo-Saxons. I think that we could quite easily be living in a world now where the Great Heathen Army had won.
Yes.
And we'd all be kind of using flat-pack IKEA furniture, and the top scorer in the Premier League would be Norwegian.
That's right.
But I'm trying to make a serious point, which is that it was all hanging on the edge of a knife.
Two moments in the Anglo-Saxon period where really things could have been dramatically different. And one is in 878, if Alfred had been killed, then there would have been a kingdom that was not England. It would have been a new Daneland, or a Daneland versus a Denmark, and also in 1066, where again on the turn of pitch and toss on one day, had William been killed at Hastings rather than Harold, which could have happened. We know that he was actually fighting in the fray himself. Then the English language would now be entirely different, and the English architectural landscape would be entirely different. So it was a time when when small changes could have led to very, very different futures.
Well, I'm also interested in your view about this, that the idea of an England, right? Because Bede, I think, talks about a nation of the English nation, or the English people.
You must work at a very good university.
They're both connected to
Alex and I are Alex. I imagine actually I should say Dr Burghart completed his PhD at King's, where I am currently carrying out my PhD. In slightly different topics, I'm afraid. So my knowledge of the period comes more from reading than from scholastic excellence.
Quizzing Calum very exactingly on dates.
No, it's the Max Adams book, The First Kingdom, which I really, really enjoyed on the period. But I was specifically going to ask about this idea of an England, and we've been through these periods of, as you say, 878, 1066. Then you could say the Civil War and the Glorious Revolution. We've had these periods where potentially the line of continuity was broken. Do you see it that way? Do you see us as the inheritors of this Anglo-Saxon or even earlier Brythonic tradition? Or do you think that there have been moments and breaks in our history?
No, and what is interesting is that despite some hugely traumatic moments in our history, there is a long continuity in England that you don't find in very many other countries. You can certainly see it in Iceland. You can certainly see it in Denmark. But there really aren't many other places where there hasn't been a major constitutional interruption at some point. And I think it's much harder to take it back to the Brythonic. What you can observe, and which is fascinating, is the likely continuity of certain types of government over very long periods. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. That we know that as soon as you have the written record in Anglo-Saxon England, you have reference to dues, to duties. Let's say you have a responsibility to fight in the army or provide people to fight in the army. You have a responsibility to build fortresses and maintain bridges. And It may well be that these are things that are cooked up in the 7th and 8th century, but when you look at the archaeological record, when you see the construction of hill forts in the pre-Roman period, there must have been a system of levy that constructed these sites. We can tell, in some instances, we can tell that they were built quite quickly. When you look at megastructures such as Stonehenge, it is very likely there were systems of levy that enabled those structures to be built. And it's quite possible that what you're actually seeing over very long periods is a residual population which behaves in much the same way over very long stretches of time. And we know that there are those continuities, those very deep continuities, because if you take the case of the Cheddar Gorge Man, who was murdered in about 7,500 BC and chucked into a cave and found by the Victorians, we know that not so long ago, enough DNA was extracted from one of his wisdom teeth to enable his genetic code to be compared to people who lived in Cheddar. And it turned out that a maths teacher in the village was a direct descendant through his mother's line. And I went to school in Somerset. It's no surprise to me to find scientific proof that nothing has changed there in 10,000 years. And
the gene pool has stayed small.
But I'm just very, very sort of comforted to know that there are these long continuities. And actually, if people families can reside in places for such a long time, then why shouldn't certain modes of local government remain the same? Why shouldn't certain traditions that we assume come later because that's when they first appear in the record? Why shouldn't they be much older as well?
Given that we have this continuity from us to them, and that perhaps Cheddar Man might be an antecedent of perhaps people in this room, perhaps we can think a little about what we can learn from Alfred and the Anglo-Saxons generally, particularly in regards to building what seems like a nation down on its luck, a nation that hardly even existed at that point.
So I think that there must have been something in Alfred's time in particular about existential threat, and that when your neighbours want you dead, it tends to focus the mind on what needs to be done, and you see it in one of the great megastructures of Anglo-Saxon England, indeed of England, which is Offa's Dyke, which is a deep ditch dug to separate, to keep the Welsh out, and which we know was dug in a space of just a few years in the middle of the 8th century, and is larger than any other earthwork in Europe. It's moments of potentially potential mortal crisis that tend to focus the mind. Now, I'm not encouraging us to create a potential a moment of mortal crisis, but I do think that when the country is developing a collective sense that nothing works, that the economy is running down, that we're not as capable of doing things as we once were, it may be possible to harness that to create a moment of radical reform that enables us to unleash the best part of ourselves.
One thing that's notable about Alfred's strategy was he seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. He had a kind of clear vision in his head, didn't he, of the burghs that needs to be built and that kind of thing. When you were in government, you were particularly interested in AI, and I'm wondering whether a tenuous link can be drawn between Alfred's technological vision of the burghs and perhaps what we need to do to preserve our sovereignty in the coming decades.
So I think that there's, as I say, Alfred was not afraid to do things in some respects completely differently, to cut across long-established interests. And we know that he used new technology in the building of his ships, which made them more capable of outpacing the Danish ships. I think what we're seeing now is an era of such rapid technological advancement that if we don't seize the moment and stay ahead, we will suddenly find ourselves very far behind. And
I mean, there was a panel just the other day run by Inference magazine with people like Tyler Cowen on it, and although there were a lot of people who disagreed, the general consensus was Britain is going to become a backwater. That we don't have any of the sort of necessary stack. We have no component that can earn us a place going forward, and basically make us have any sort of relevance whatsoever.
Well, maybe we can put this to Laura. Why is it that you're devoting a chunk of your career to making AI work for government? You must feel it's pretty important.
Well, I certainly do. And I think that the thread that came out in Alex's comments, you started off by saying that order arises out of chaos, which of course it doesn't, and that's contrary to the laws of thermodynamics. But systems tend to greater disorder unless you do work, which is then, of course, what Alfred and I've known very little about history, but that's what I've learned from this. It's very important to do that work, otherwise things get worse. And AI genuinely could be this moment of existential threat that could go either way. There's certainly a lot of potential for very bad things to arise. And there's also, I think, we're in a space where if you just sort of leave it to its own devices, as in the way society interacts with AI, we are quite likely, and it's a fool's game to predict the future, but it seems really quite likely that the ways it will go will particularly widen inequalities. It seems very plausible that the people that are already sort of ahead, that are already benefiting, that are already enabled, will become more enabled, better educated, more supported, and the people that aren't will become more disadvantaged and will lag behind more. You can see a world, we're already seeing the sort of trajectory of the difference between very rich and very poor widening, even though the poorer people, largely are not as poor as they used to be in some ways, and you can see that getting worse and worse. Yet you can't sort of fight things you don't understand. So when we're in the government space, it's very, very important to make sure that you have people within the system that are actually really expert. So you can get those people to come in and build things that make things better for people, that are in keeping with the way that we think the world should work, that reduce health inequalities and that save lives and make sure that the services that people are being given are fit for purpose and are early enough to intervene in their lives to make things better. You also need those people to actually be watching and be ready to respond if something does go dramatically wrong. And if they're not in government and they're all outside in big tech companies, you could be in a space where it's too late if something goes dramatically wrong.
I mean, I'm struck by you saying watching, because that seems to me to be a route again to greater irrelevance, right? That, I mean, Britain has succeeded in some way, having, say, a world-class AI safety institute, but in, I would say, the most challenging and scary visions of an artificial intelligence development post sort of AGI, AI safety ceases to be. I mean, everyone has to be signed up for it, right? Rogue superintelligence is not something you can control. You need to actually be at the forefront, so really guiding it and being the one building it yourself.
So you certainly do want to be at the forefront, and we'll come back to the point about what Britain can do about that in a minute, hopefully. But when I say watching, this is actually incredibly important. We didn't see ChatGPT coming. Even people working in OpenAI didn't really see it coming, and we weren't prepared to respond to it appropriately, which is why you saw a degree of fluster and flurry when it first hit the market in governments and outside. We didn't really see DeepSeek coming, and again, we weren't really terribly well prepared to respond to it. And the way that people worldwide had responded to the first ChatGPT, people built things, people were afraid, people published a lot of articles, and then after a little bit of time, some people invested very heavily. And when DeepSeek hit, that investment turned out not to be really worth doing. So, they ran at something because it was new, and they weren't paying attention to everything else that was going on. We will get the next draft of technology that will come forward based on history and, the way the world works in terms of predictability, which is a lot less predictable than people want it to be. We probably won't see it coming. Now, if you're sat there focusing on what can I build with current technology, and not paying very, very close attention to what else is in the, the now casting, the thing that is actually happening now, but we haven't noticed yet, then we overcommit to both building on that kind of technology and also protecting ourselves against that kind of technology, which is why, a lot of the tech people, for example, have not been very enthusiastic about the EU regulations because they're very focused on existing tech and they don't really have any provision for what happens if something else arises. So when we're talking about watching, I'm not talking about passively watching, I'm talking about really paying attention and keeping your eyes much wider than what exactly is happening now through to what could be happening in the very near future. And we do need to do that.
So what's been your experience of trying to bring AI into government? Can you describe to us how you've worked with government, what you've tried to achieve, and I suppose how you've been thwarted at every turn?
Oh, well, that's unnecessarily negative, I think. No, well, it was a very interesting time, and ChatGPT hit, and Alex and I were talking a lot about the data and technology, and I think our first concern was about sort of existential
So
threat
you were
and
brought
risks.
in when ChatGPT dropped.
Well, Laura was already working. Laura was working in government before I became minister in the Cabinet Office, and we were working on a couple of ideas together. And so I should say that just to sort of try and tie up our different conversations. One of the things that Alfred does is, as a great king, is to bring as many intellects from around the country and around the Western world to his court. And Laura was one such great intellect. I wasn't the king. I was just sort of mere sort of player upon the stage. But Laura was someone who had enormous experience of both of technology and of the way that government worked. And whilst we were working together, ChatGPT suddenly emerged, and she showed it to me. I played around with it. I got it to write poetry in Old English. Wasn't bad. I got into arguments with it about the result of the Battle of Otford in 776, and I sort of thought that I could see where it was going to go, in that it was going to become a partially unreliable source of information for a lot of people in government. But actually, quite quickly, that changed, and we became engaged in a conversation about how we could use it in order to improve services for the public, save money for the taxpayer, and generally make government more efficient. And to that end, together we established i.ai, which attracted other, brilliant, sadly not medieval scholars from across the country to come and work with us. And it was one of those moments where you really don't know whether something's going to be a success, in that we couldn't possibly pay the same wages that the private sector did, but what we could offer was the opportunity to work with a lot of data, a lot of government data, and the enthusiasm that we found out there was enormous. We had far more applicants than we could deal with, and it enabled Laura to build a really fantastic team.
Yeah, and I think that it was something that was very important for us to grip at the time, because the first response was, risk, threat, etc., and the Safety Institute was set up very sensibly. But if you're sitting there as a government only worrying about the risk, then you're assuming risk with no benefit. And what we really wanted to do was grab this to deliver better public services and better outcomes. And you are existing in a world in which money is finite and the NHS is very expensive, and looking towards a future in which potentially you can't afford to do that anymore. So there really is a drive. You can either let things decay, or you can do work and make them much better and adopt a new paradigm, a new way of working. We felt very strongly that that was the right thing to do with this technology. The risk still exists, but let's go and try and get every possible reward.
And the system wasn't terribly happy about it at all times.
I mean, it wasn't always super thrilled, but that was true of the data science I was doing already as well. So I think we were already used to working in an environment where the majority of the civil service, that's perhaps not fair, parts of the civil service were very disquieted, and in different ways. Some of them were perhaps quite unhappy about unfiltered data going to decision makers. without going through the lens of a private secretary who might delete anything that, perhaps looks unsavoury. And parts of the system were very uncomfortable just with the idea of, these rogue technologists running around. Somebody told me for every engineer I hired, I needed to hire 2 Whitehall Sherpas because they didn't think that engineers could talk to other humans in a way that would be non-threatening. Which as an engineer I took fairly personally, so we didn't do that.
Both Tom and I are quaking over here.
Terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. But yes, we did manage to find those people, and we found people that worked in, the chap who's still there now is absolutely fantastic, built some of the core components of Microsoft Copilot and came to work for us. We had people from Quantum Back, all sorts of... and the reason they came in was, you've got this access to data, but you've also got a cause. And actually, a lot of technologists love a cause, but the idea that you could actually use technology and you could yourself see the impact on people's lives. You could build something that goes, either directly or indirectly to the public, that you can evidence money saved to save lives in the NHS, or you could actually see them benefiting from much better services in some cases that do save lives. That's very attractive.
Exactly, you weren't just building a gizmo for a rich guy.
Exactly, and a lot of technology is in that space, and a lot of it's sort of quite dull, quite honestly. So it was a very attractive proposition. We didn't really struggle to find great people, and they came for the mission.
Yeah,
I mean, you bring this up, but we've seen NHS budgets rise and productivity flatline. The promise of AI is intelligence on tap, right? That we can replace ultimately a lot of knowledge workers. And I think it depends where you are in your career, whether that is an exciting or a terrifying prospect. Why have we not seen this rolled out further?
Well, it's not completely trivial to do, and the use cases, you have to be a little bit careful with them. I think, for one thing, there's not really a great deal of appetite from the public to replace all decision makers with AI, and as a technologist, I don't think it's a good idea. We're certainly not there yet, and we're not sure we want to be there, depending on who you ask. But when you're building people talk about AI as though it's some great thing all on its own. It's not. It's largely a software component. You've got AI in your phone, on your email system that does a better job every time you upgrade it of detecting spam and saving you from phishing attacks. Someone still has to build that. So when we're looking around government, it's not as though you could just wander into the NHS and go, I gift thee with AI, magic wand, ta-da. You have to replace existing systems. You should be assessing whether or not the existing systems are the right systems to replace, or if you should throw them away and do something else entirely. You're going to have to engineer it with current data systems. If it's anywhere near actual healthcare, you're going to have to run a randomized control trial and prove that it works and it's not risking people's lives. It's not trivial. There are ways in which it is trivial, and there you do see it rolled out. So large language models for doing, well, we're using them in government legislation, actually, interestingly enough. You can use something like an AI to draft legislation and do it really, really well, but you still need that human to check it. You couldn't just let the AI run all the laws in the country. Because we don't think it ought to, but also because the risks are too high. So there's intention, and you need people that are really expert in it to do it. And government actually is not chock full of several thousand people that can just go off and do that. They're in the hundreds, and we need that to grow if we're going to really adopt better practices quickly.
And what's on your wish list for things that Britain could do over the coming years to ensure that we get a slice of this pie and our sovereignty is not compromised, all that kind of thing?
So there are a few things. Where we started, and I think we did this very well, we were, and I think still are, at the forefront in terms of actually building it ourselves. So having a team that has open sourced the code, which grows public trust, but can drive sort of greater growth across the public sector. Having a team that can come in and actually build the thing into the system. You don't have to procure it. You don't have to spend hundreds of millions of pounds. They can build it at cost, which is tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in staff time. And we got there first, and we proved that you could do it. We proved that it could work, and we didn't make any massive mistakes that would have actually really impeded progress. So more
and then
widely,
you own it. And you have a team that's invested in it, and you're not dealing with a corporate that might get bored and walk off, or decide that there's something in the contract that says actually it owns all of the data in the NHS, and that was I think that was the first thing
And
was gotten right.
Exactly, and I think we were the first government they worked with, certainly, that did that. So you do have Singapore, who has quite a separate digital function, and they did a lot of chatbots. They built a lot of services, and actually a lot of governments have got chat interfaces to things. But in terms of actually building the algorithms into the system, we were probably up front with that. And I think the adoption side for Britain is very powerful. We shouldn't be rushing off to try and create the next large language model. We've missed the boat. We're behind. There's enough of them. They're good. Sure, you don't own them. That's a bit of a downside. But being the best in the world at using them to drive value and having a really thriving, tech ecosystem with lots of companies that are doing this very well, very effectively, that is a space that we can and should work with. We're not currently doing the best at training people. Canada has, I think every university has, and has had for a while, machine learning courses, and they have huge numbers of people, but they don't necessarily have the companies for those people to go and work with. Let's bring them all here, and let's make that adoption part the piece that we do really well. The other thing I think to remember is that, as I mentioned earlier, ChatGPT arrived, everyone very surprised. DeepMind, everyone very surprised. Reinventing the wheel and trying to copy what other people are doing is a mistake, but there are large areas in AI where people haven't plumbed this technology, where there is really space for brand new innovation, where you could come up with a new paradigm, modeling the way that this AI should work. The current engineering around neural networks is, I think, quite suboptimal and could be radically
You're talking
improved.
about transformer architectures.
There are other ways that you could. I've got some insider information that I'm not going to say here. So that's basically.
Oh, come on.
There are
Spoil
other things
sport.
that you could build that the UK could invest in that other countries aren't doing, that aren't your basic large language models as they currently exist. There are also other kinds of technology that we could really be pivoting towards. There's still quite a lot to play for in the quantum space.
But isn't the point that at the moment we are in a transitional period, right? We're in this period where intelligence is, you're right, not perfect, but cheap-ish. But it is going to get better, and we will find ourselves very rapidly, unless you're going to say not, rapidly at a point where intelligence is not just good, but performing as well as, if not better than us, right? Like, we are in a transition period, and actually planning anything based on the fact that this transition period is going to continue is potentially short-sighted.
Well, no, what about the exascale computer, which you wanted to see built? Isn't that right, Alex?
Yes, I did. And and it wasn't my idea; it was the Prime Minister's idea. Rishi Sunak was very aware that our supercomputer Archer 2 in Edinburgh, which I went to see, is exactly what you want a supercomputer to be. It's big and black, and it's got lots of flashing lights on it, and it has a cooling system that sort of makes a low hum, and a kind of the use of electricity that sort of makes a little high squeak. So you get a sense that there's sort of something sort of deep going on there. But it's getting old, and Rishi quite rightly said we need to have the best compute out there, and which costs money. And when it came to it, bits of the system fought very hard to stop that money being spent, and slowed down the process until there was an election, and then the next government, on advice, ditched it. Now, it may be about to reverse that decision, which would be very wise, but we've gone through the better part of a year now where we've slowed ourselves down, and we could have gotten on with the process of acquiring that sovereign capability.
A little bit back on the point you're making before as well is that, the idea that we're in transition period and we're sliding towards something inevitable, that might be right. But we don't know what that looks like. And everybody who currently says that they do is guessing. There's been a lot of research on people's ability to predict the future. It's very, very poor. I don't know if you ever read the Tetlock study. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, what, 2 years is kind of the longest horizon that people can, the super forecasters can do it.
Yeah, and that's super forecast. Technologists are very, very bad at predicting the future, and that the objective ignorance in the current system is intensely high. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago what AI would look like, I would have said that we would have replaced shelf stackers with robots. And actually where we are is we're very far advanced in human language, and we are currently missing a lot in the spatial arena. When we go out and we invest in supercomputers, which we should do, you have to make decisions about the kind of chips that you are committing to. And the next paradigm of AI may be built on a very different type of physical system. And we don't know that yet. So assumptions that it's all going in a certain direction and this will happen, I think are very difficult to make. And I think we will all look back in another 2 years and say, well, we didn't quite know what was coming next. It's not to say you shouldn't invest in being.
Well, I think you have to take. At some point, you have to take a punt or accept that someone else will win. And we should. Well, we shouldn't just be buying exascale. We should be investing very heavily in quantum. And the betting on the future is a gamble. But if you don't, if you don't play, you can't take home the jackpot.
Yeah, and I think in this space, the exascale is very interesting. And, I remember we visited and talking to them about the decisions they made about fail-safing and sort of redundancy and the amount of energy it takes to make a full backup of everything and the kind of decisions they'd made around not perhaps taking a full backup of everything, which is all very, very rational. And we sort of need to be taking those kind of decisions, I think, in every space that we're working in. So you build a system that is future looking and that will enable you to be competitive, because we really need that. But as you design it, you want to think about how flexible it is. Can you make it more flexible? Are there ways to invest that, allow you to pivot a little bit later on? And the idea that we're just sort of casually sliding towards AGI that will be generally and multifunctionally intelligent in a way that's better than humans and will be energy affordable, that's not definite. And that probably does require genuinely new technology that we don't have yet. Maybe we could do that.
But I mean, that is a view. It is one that is not necessarily shared by a lot of technologists. I mean, fair enough if that's your position, but it does seem to me that even if we're going to say that transformer architectures don't take you to that kind of general intelligence, the conversation we're having here about, are we even going to upgrade exascale, which can do compute, matrix multiplications are used in a whole lot of other things, right? Computational fluid dynamics, forecasting, whatever.
True.
That it seems that even if we're going to say that this architecture that is currently very successful, we're not going to invest in that, it seems that we're also not then going to be doing, thermodynamic computing or...
I'm sorry, I certainly don't mean that you shouldn't invest in it at all. It's very important to be able to do that sort of, and have that sort of sovereign capability. So I'm certainly not suggesting you don't invest in it. I think that it comes back to this watching point, that if you only focus on that, we're going to miss the opportunity for the next big thing.
What do you think of what Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, says about sovereign AI, which is essentially that it's very important for a country that wants to retain its independence to ensure that it keeps hold of its data and that it's not outsourcing it to some foreign model that 20 years down the line, Donald Trump Jr. could turn off if he wants access to your cobalt mine or something. Similarly, if you have control of the data and the decision making, you also keep a hold of the development of your culture, I suppose.
Okay, it's really interesting because he's right, and sort of I think clearly, obviously,
but he's
right,
also benefiting, lining his pockets extraordinarily from selling us all this computing architecture.
Well, absolutely. So it is true that there is a risk if you don't own your own data, and we see that in the NHS, you see that, sort of across the board in business, in government. Owning your own data is a very good way to maintain control. There is an opportunity cost in us deciding that we will not use foreign large language models, for example, and build our own, because it costs a lot of money. And you've got to balance out, is that where your money goes, or do you think we need to use it on something else? Do we think there is enough competition in the market that you could pivot from this provider to that provider, neither of which are British owned, and still make sure that you could deliver the kind of technology that you need to deliver? And I'm not going to take a view on that. because frankly, it's a political decision, actually, what's most important. But there is finite money. So when you go off and try to make everything sovereign, there is something else that you're not going to fix with that money. And that's why it's not trivial to just go and say we're going to do this all ourselves.
Well, it's not just money, is it? It's also state capacity. So, Alex, perhaps we can put this to you. Isn't it unfortunate that this technological revolution is coming along at a time when it does seem quite difficult for a government to assertively say, we're going to do something and snap their fingers and like the Victorians, just make it happen? Or maybe that's an unfair characterization and it's always been difficult.
No, I don't think it has always been this difficult. And I think if you look back in history, governments have at certain moments, rather than really continuously, been much more capable of buying things fast or building things fast. And, that said, you can, if you go and look at the Duke of Wellington's letters from the Peninsular War campaign, his absolute furiousness with the bean counters in London, who are slowing down his ability to acquire the munitions and ammunition that he needs, is just sort of reminds you that it wasn't always plain sailing, even the days before a sort of dense bureaucracy. And but what we can, I think, learn from previous periods is that if it's all about priorities. That if your priority is the swift acquisition or the swift development of something, then you can do it if you're prepared to let other things go. And what we have developed sort of accidentally over the past 30 years is an intensively legalistic approach to government and to life, which slows down pretty much everything. And
who started that? Go on.
So we are in the collapse of a paradigm which began in earnest from about 1997 onwards, and which, in the same way that in the late 70s, the country was faced with sort of the collapse of the post-war order, the post-war consensus. And it was clear that it had become very difficult to grow the economy. It became very difficult for the country to do anything because of nationalisation, because of the power of the unions. That our economy was now clearly built on the wrong foundations, and it was Thatcher and the people around her in the late 70s who broke that apart and said it doesn't need to be like this. That there is a future in the sort of dynamic economy that we had prior to the two world wars that we need to get back. And similarly, right now, I think we have a world of entrenched legalism and bureaucratic sclerosis, a kind of aversion to risk, which means that doing anything is time-consuming and expensive in a world that is very fast-moving. And that is, to the point that you were making earlier, Calum, that is a world in which you can get left behind very fast.
Well, I mean, it's the name of one of your papers, right? Alex wrote about the doomed elites of the Anglo-Saxon world when the Normans arrived. I mean, in many ways, this end of this paradigm, beginning in 1907, you are potentially now going to be left holding the bag, right? That the Tory party at the moment, MRP polls suggest, might be down to 10 seats. We are in a position now where these forces, the combined force, both technological and sort of political, cultural, economic, are such that anyone associated with those, that past period is potentially in trouble. Do you see people who were associated with that as able to potentially reconcile or absolve themselves of that? Or do you think we are in for a very sharp shock?
I think that polls change, and 4 years out from a general election is a terrible time to know what will happen in it. That in 1980, it was the widespread view that the SDP, who were over 50% in the polls at the time, were going to march inevitably to power. and where
So you're crossing your fingers on Nigel Farage shooting a dog.
The point is that new political parties do not always have the longevity of old ones, but who knows, right? And but where we are, certainly where we are now in terms of the public's view of government and the public's view of the way in which the country is working, is that they feel themselves getting poorer. They have felt themselves getting poorer over a 20-year period, and they are understandably angry about it. And the opportunity for the next government, because I don't believe that this government is going to fix it, I don't believe this government is capable of fixing it, the opportunity for the next government is to use this moment of crisis and use this public sentiment to make fundamental changes to the way in which we do things. And now, as Laura says, we don't know what the world will be like in 4 years' time. We don't know what technology will be available. But just as we are living through a very disruptive phase right now, it may well be that the new technology that is that we're enjoying right now is itself disrupted by a new force of which we currently unaware. What matters most is your awareness of that fact and your ability to change it fast. And the first thing that a new government will need to do is quickly change the way in which government works so that it can be more reactive.
Why should that government be the Tories? I mean,
that's a very political question. I come up to this noble space station to talk about higher ideas.
Well, I think listeners hearing to what you say will be perhaps might chafe against this perception that the Tories could have fixed all this, but perhaps you have a pitch to them, or perhaps it was harder than it looked.
I think if you look at the period when the Conservatives were in power between 2010 and 2024, there are 5 years of coalition where there is essentially a mission to save the country from the deficit spiralling out of control. That mission is achieved. That we avoid, we crack down on the deficit, but there's not much space to do other things. You then have a constitutional crisis which runs from 2015 really through to 2019, and that is immediately followed by the biggest constitutional. You've had the biggest financial meltdown since 1929. You then have the biggest constitutional crisis since 1916. You then have the biggest public health scare since 1919. You then have immediately afterwards the biggest land war in Europe since 1945, which leads to the biggest energy crisis since the 1970s, the worst inflation since the 1980s. And so the moment within that 14 years where the government could have said, do you know what, let's fundamentally rewire the way in which we do things, is limited. But it actually, going back to my original point about the crisis being the opportunity, I think there was a moment during COVID where it could have been done. And people like Dominic Cummings have written about that, and I think they're right. You have to, if your instincts and your capacity and your energies are available at those liquid moments, you can build something new. And you don't have to revert exactly to how things were, when the crisis passes. I think that what will hopefully happen after the next election is that an incoming party will be able to seize that genuinely exciting and capable moment of when you enter power to change things. And the reason I think it should be the Conservative Party is because the Labour Party is in power now and is suffering from the problems of sort of status quoism. I don't think government comes at you very, very fast. If you don't know what you want to do when you get there, good luck. The reform is absolutely the repository for the country's anger at the moment, but I think has neither the depth nor breadth or the experience to deal with it. That might change, but I haven't seen any sign of it yet. the people who are now at the top of the Conservative Party were the sort of middle-ranking ministers in the time where we felt all of the frustrations of the existing system, and we're carrying that through. And the danger for all oppositions is that you stay in opposition so long that you lose that experience of government. It fades away, and the nature of government changes whilst you're out. And when you get in, you've got a lot of new people who assume it was just the crazy, stupid other party who was getting things wrong, or assumes that if you turn up and you're just decent people, everything will work for you. And I think that's what happened to Labour. So it's the Conservative Party right now has an appetite for change and experience to do so, and it would be great to be part of that.
Well, I want to state for the record here, in case it's not clear, I was a civil servant. I have no interest in party politics whatsoever. But sort of Alex's point, which is partially that there's a human problem in government, is I think the right one. You do tend to get a huge focus on the political side of things. But you have a very, very large system of 500,000 people, many of whom have been in that system a very, very long time. And the status quo bias is very high. And the system, one of the things I learned is the system puts out very strong antibodies against change. It can be very difficult, even if you really know what you're doing, to actually force a change through the system. It takes huge amounts of energy. It takes huge amounts of time. And you can find yourself in a position where, the opposition to the change you're trying to make is actually all-consuming and can take up almost all of your time and energy. So the idea that you do need a kind of breaking change, that you need some external stimulus that renders the ability to break things is suddenly, as a possibility, like COVID, etc. I think that's really true. And I think that these technological advancements could be used in that way if they're used in the right way. There is a way to get government in a state where they see that change as both the opportunity and the threat it genuinely is. And you can make and enforce that change. But, as you've said, it's actually a very difficult thing to do. And I think generally people don't appreciate how hard it is not only to change the existing system, but to get that change to stick and not just immediately unravel the minute you take your finger off it.
How good can things be for this country if we do manage to make it stick?
Well, I'm hugely optimistic and always tend to be quite optimistic. So I believe that it can be made to happen. And I think that if we genuinely, jointly, and I'm particularly looking at technologists in the UK for this, build the kind of systems that are act earlier on in the process. If we really look towards sort of prevention, if we look to rewiring systems, if we look to greater data collection, better management of that data at the time, and then enforcing really professional practices in government. I want to see government run the way you would run a hedge fund, with really good management of your assets and of a really good understanding of your risk, and reinvesting in things that work, and crucially killing things that don't, and killing teams that are not effective and not doing good things. I believe it's possible, and I think if you did do it, we would be in a position where there is enough money to provide the sort of services that we think people deserve. But the institutional inertia is high, and it would be easy to underestimate how difficult that is, and how many people and how many brains and how much effort and energy needs to go into actually making that happen.
And Alex, maybe we can put a similar question to you. And I note that some pleasing context is that your colleague Rob Jenrick has described himself as an Anglo-futurist. With that in mind, what is your vision for Britain? What could Britain be in 50 years if things go well in the ways that we've been discussing?
Well, I suppose I'm more of an Anglo-Saxon futurist, but I think that there is more than a fighting chance for us, because I think that the long-standing fundamentals of the country are still there. And what I mean by that is that when you have a country that has a long adaptation to things like democracy and free speech and a free press and so on. I know those things are all under attack in their own way, but they are still there. It means that you are more likely to be adaptable to rapid change than countries where that's not the case. And I think that sometimes people sort of see the rise of China as absolutely ineluctable. But there's a part of me that thinks that actually what you're more likely to see is should Chinese growth come to be much reduced, as is not impossible given their aging population, is enormous tension in the country, which has no pressure valve release. And so I think that our fundamentals, we have many fundamentals in place, but in terms of economic growth and our ability to seize technology, that's where the challenge lies. What's very refreshing is that we've seen a much more open and enlivened debate about things like the cost of energy, which unquestionably holding the country back. We're seeing a much more open debate about the deployment of new technology in government, about regulation, before you even get onto things like tax. So I think that there is a very exciting debate about the future of the country and the future of the economy starting up in this country, which hasn't been there for a while. I think where we can be is absolutely at the forefront of modern technology, and I think that will create some amazing opportunities for us, not least because ultimately, I was in Washington recently, and a number of the sort of political hacks there were saying, you got it tough, but you have this quality that a lot of new countries don't have. You have a past. You have a deep ingrained culture that means that people will want to live in the UK, and that people want to stay in the UK, and that people will believe in the UK as an identity, and will be much more transient in other places. Now, that is, in some ways, that is the essence of futurism, right? That you take your old strengths and you turn them into new virtues. And so I have as an Anglo-Saxonist, I have a tendency towards sort of fatalism and sort of apocalypticism, because the Normans can never be that far away, or the possibility for the snake to swallow the sun is there, that the dragon will one day come. But I don't think we're in any means done. I think that actually there is a lot more in this story still to be told.
It's a Grendel challenge rather than a dragon challenge.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I mean, look, super AI may be the dragon, right? That at some point we may be superseded. But I think we're still in the early stages of the story, and we have a lot more years yet left to reign yet.
What great things could we do as a country? Could we?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I've been thinking about this, and again, with sort of an Anglo-Saxon bent in mind. One of the things that I'm worried that we're going to lose, or we are losing as a country, is common experience. Right? And when I was a young man, when I was a boy, there were 4 TV channels and about 12 newspapers, and everybody absorbed much the same content every day, and that isn't there anymore. Everything is much more fractured and diffuse. But there is nothing to stop us creating a sort of holographic, virtual reality mead hall for the whole country, right? Why couldn't you build this a massive Herot in the virtual space, to which the country's Witan would be obliged to assemble every year. You would have to come and enter this world and hang out with your fellow subjects, citizens, and the fellow people of the Shire, and share something. I think it'd be wonderful, actually, and we could. It wouldn't take very much to do it.
I'd probably like to inject. There are some technological challenges.
Temporary challenges.
I think you're right. They are temporary, and I think the kind of developments that I would guess, and probably be wrong, that we're working towards at the moment, that we hope that Britain could be at the forefront of, would enable that sort of development, and we should be working hard to be able to do that sort of thing. But it does require some new tech.
No, but I also going back to one of your first shows. I'd love to see us. I'd love to see us create Doggerland. But not just. So, but it ought to be sort of Doggershire, really. And
this is going to make a terrific news headline.
I think it was suggested that that's where the heavy industry should be. But I don't think that's quite right. I think the heavy industry.
Well, we're going to put that on Antarctica now.
Yeah, well, fair enough. But I would put it in space.
But,
and
we want to have a future that feels like home.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
One of the things that we like to discuss on the spot.
Right.
That's why this space station is thatched, all that kind of thing. Yeah. It's very easy to think of the future in terms of clinical, impersonal terms that don't feel specific to your country and this kind of cultural inheritance stretching back to Alfred and before then. But if it's going to be something that people want to subscribe to and want to support, i.e. something like a future that is actually viable, then it has to be something that people can see themselves in, surely. So it will have to involve something like mead halls or something culturally recognisable.
Yes, exactly. We must never, we mustn't lose pubs, and we mustn't lose the English, a rural landscape,
cricket grounds, and
well, that's right. And we've got to. The most important thing in order to make the future not seem like a foreign country is to make sure that it looks and feels like the old country in part, and with one renovated equally in part to accommodate the changing environment around it. So what I love about your show and your approach is that you understand the aesthetic element which is necessary in comfortable futurism. That there ought to the future ought to have more wood in it, and wool, and leather, and and thatch, and maybe what we need are genetically enhanced oaks that can grow fast enough to make sure that the next generation of building has sufficient appropriate material in order to maintain that link with the past.
And that requires real work again. And I think we see decisions about where the work should go in a lot of the technology space. What we've been talking about, sort of culture across Europe. There are languages with countries where there are too many native speakers, and they really struggle with even a decent translation of a large language model. You need to be building those distilled models that encapsulate not just the language that you use, but actually the culture and the local history. And that's not going to happen by itself, and it's not going to happen because OpenAI goes and does it. So that is the kind of thing where we need to decide to do work to make that happen, and I do think that's really important.
I think that's a really important point, Laura, and that you've got to have, we have to make sure that we have models that are honed to our particular cultural mores and traditions, and that the Anglo-Saxons had this concept called weird, WYRD, which is a very complex idea, which is a sort of fatalism connected to one's past and future, and the need to be brave in the face of facing up to your fate, and actually we need some sort of weird wide web that connects us with with the great and terrible tales of old and the experiences of our country folk, and that means that the English and the British past is fundamental to the way in which we plan for the English and British future.
I wondered if you thought about the opposition to that. I mean, you talked, Laura, about the opposition that you find in Parliament or in government, that you will have what to you seems an eminently sensible idea, and you'll have vast opposition that almost means that all your time is spent fighting force rather than actually achieving something. There are a lot of people who truly dislike what you just described, would call it twee, pastiche, are very eager to escape a Britain that feels like Britain. I mean, aesthetically, we are much more UK than we are Great Britain, right? Where do you think that instinct comes from? And what will it take to make young children growing up regain that sense of a common experience? Because it can't just be technology. We've seen a collapse of like mass politics and collapse of a mass experience. Well, what will it take for people to see themselves once again as a people?
So I think that there has been this slightly destructive political force which has tried to restart English history in 1945, or at best in sort of 1914. But it's almost as though anything that happened before the Second World War was either tragic or bad, and everything that's happened since is sort of an attempt to build a great new Jerusalem. And I think that is wrong, and I think in the instincts of most people in the country that is wrong, but there are a very powerful and vocal minority who have acquired control of certain institutions who are trying to tug the country in that direction, and it must be resisted. And I think the appeal of things, success of things like The Rest is History, is a sign that there is still a fondness for, an attachment to, and consequently a relevance of the deep national past. And without nations without a shared sense of past, cease to be nations.
There is that degree of pride as well, I think, and that's where good government comes in. People still have a great deal of pride in the NHS. If the services deteriorate to a point when that's no longer true, you really just start to lose that shared common sense of belonging to something good, and that's very difficult to recover once it goes. So again, these kind of active choices about how you build a better government and how you take advantage of technology in very specific directions to build a country that people do feel really proud of being part of feels very important to me.
Listeners, we've heard the pitch. I don't think we'll quite be changing the name of the podcast to the Anglo-Saxon Futurist podcast, but it's been a strong effort nonetheless from Dr. Alex Burghart, MP. Thank you very much for listening. We will send you on your merry way back down the gravity well with a goodie bag full of mead and copper and iron ore that we have torn from this sacred land.
Alex, what reading recommendations might you have for our listeners?
Well, I'm going to give you an Anglo-Saxon recommendation, as befits the theme of our conversation. The most brilliant man, I think, to write about Anglo-Saxon history and the significance and power and sophistication of the Anglo-Saxon state was a guy called Professor James Campbell, who died in 2016. And you can read his book, two collections of his essays, essays in Anglo-Saxon history and the Anglo-Saxon state. But his unpublished papers are going to be published next year, edited by myself and George Garnett and Alan Thacker, and they will come out under the title of Origins of the English State.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to having a signed hardback in the King Charles III space station.
Here, yes.
Laura, is there anything that you would like our listeners to go and read?
Absolutely. The Tony Blair Institute has just released a lovely paper on how you should entirely digitise and transform the way the government spends money with AI. So do go and have a read. It's absolutely fascinating as a topic and not at all dry.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Alex. We'll enjoy that bedtime reading. It's been a pleasure having you.